I'll never forget the moment. It was at my husband's funeral, and just as I was trying to steady my breath, his best friend leaned close and whispered something in my ear that shook me to my very core. I'll tell you exactly what he said, but first please take a second to subscribe, and also let me know down in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day it is. I'd love to hear from you. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie, and I'm 72 years old. I had been married to my husband, Robert, for almost 50 years. 50 years, imagine that. Half a century of sharing mornings and nights, quarrels and reconciliations, raising children, balancing bills, and all those small little rituals that make a marriage what it is. When he passed away, it wasn't just losing him, it was losing the shape of my days, the anchor of my life. That morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window pane. I had always hated rainy days, but this one felt especially cruel, as if the heavens themselves were mourning Robert's passing. I sat at the edge of my bed for what felt like an eternity, my black dress laid neatly across the chair, waiting for me. My daughter, Caroline, had picked it out, saying it was appropriate. I hadn't cared what I wore. Honestly, nothing seemed appropriate to bury a man you thought you'd spend your last breath beside. The drive to the church was silent. Caroline was behind the wheel, her lips pressed tightly together, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding her upright. Beside her sat my son, David, shifting uncomfortably in his suit. He'd never been one for formal clothes. I noticed how neither of them spoke. Grief has a way of stealing words from your mouth, leaving only sighs and heavy silence in its place. When we arrived, the church was already filled with faces from the past. Neighbors we hadn't spoken to in years, old co-workers of Robert's, even acquaintances who I wasn't sure had any real connection to him. Death draws people like that. It's not always about love. Sometimes it's just curiosity or a need to be seen. I kept my eyes forward, unwilling to engage, unwilling to let my fragile composure crack before the service even began. Then I saw him. Michael. Robert's best friend since they were boys. They'd grown up on the same block, gone to the same schools, even joined the army together. Though Robert had been discharged early after an injury, Michael stayed in longer, but when he came home they picked up right where they left off. 4 years, Michael was at our kitchen table almost every weekend, sharing a beer with Robert, talking about everything from football to politics. I liked Michael well enough. He was a permanent fixture in our lives. But as the years wore on, I began to notice little things. Quiet conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Phone calls taken outside. Moments when Robert would look at me, then quickly look away when Michael was around. I told myself I was imagining it. Paranoia was an easy cloak to wear when loneliness crept into marriage. But now, standing in the church, watching Michael's eyes lock onto mine, I felt a tremor in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. The service began. Hymns I'd sung 100 times suddenly caught in my throat. Words blurred as tears rolled down my face, but I tried to keep my posture steady. I owed Robert that much. The priest spoke of love and loyalty, of the bonds of marriage, of the legacy a man leaves behind. Each word echoed in the still air of the church, wrapping around me like both a comfort and a noose. Finally, the line began to form. One by one, people came up to me, offering condolences, squeezing my hands, patting my shoulder, saying all those phrases you hear at funerals. He's in a better place. He'll never be forgotten. He was a good man. Words meant to soothe, but they slid right off me. Because no one really knows what to say when death enters the room. Then Michael approached. His steps were deliberate, slow, as though every inch forward was weighted with thought. He didn't look at the coffin. His eyes were fixed on me. He leaned down, closer than was polite, his lips brushing near my ear. I need to tell you something about Robert, he whispered. But not here. My breath caught. My body went rigid. Of all the words he could have said, those were the ones that rooted themselves deep into me, spreading panic and curiosity like wildfire. Not here. Why not here? Why not now? I wanted to demand answers, to grab him by the lapels of his suit and force the words out of him. But the church wasn't the place. Surrounded by people with Robert's coffin mere feet away, I could only stare back at Michael, my hands trembling in my lap. The rest of the service passed in a haze. I don't remember the final prayers, or the sound of the organ as they wheeled Robert out. All I remember is Michael's voice, echoing in my head like a drumbeat. I need to tell you something about Robert. At the graveside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was soft and uneven beneath my heels. I clutched Caroline's arm, pretending I needed her support, though my mind was far away. I watched the casket lower, my heart breaking all over again, but beneath the grief was something else, an anger I couldn't name yet, an itch for truth, clawing at me from inside. After the final handfuls of dirt were tossed, the crowd began to thin. Some went to their cars, others lingered, speaking in hushed tones. I tried to listen to Caroline, who was asking me if I wanted to come straight home or stop by the reception hall where sandwiches and coffee waited. But my eyes searched for Michael. And there he was, standing off to the side, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on me. I excused myself from my children and walked toward him. Each step was heavy, each breath sharp. When I reached him, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What do you need to tell me?" He looked around as if afraid someone might overhear. Then he leaned in again. "Not here, Maggie. Later. At your house." My pulse quickened. My house? Why there? I wanted to shout, to tell him to stop speaking in riddles, to give me the truth before my heart gave out from the suspense. But instead I nodded, because I knew I couldn't make a scene at Robert's graveside. The ride back home with my children was unbearable. They chatted quietly about the guests, the flowers, the priest's words, all in that muted way people talk after funerals, but I barely heard them. My mind was tangled in questions. What could Michael possibly know? Why hadn't Robert told me himself? And why now, why only after he was gone? By the time we arrived at the house, my nerves were frayed. I excused myself quickly, telling Caroline and David that I needed some time alone. They didn't argue. They understood, or at least they thought they did. An hour later, a knock came at my door. Michael. I let him in. The sight of him in my home without Robert there felt strange, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong place. He stood in the living room, rainwater dripping from his coat, eyes darting around as though the walls themselves might be listening. "Please," I said, my voice shaking, "tell me what you meant. Tell me what you know about Robert." He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. Then he spoke. "Maggie, there was a part of Robert's life you never knew about. And it's time you did." And with that, the world I thought I knew began to crumble. I froze in place, staring at Michael as if he'd spoken a foreign language. My throat felt dry, my palms clammy against the fabric of my dress. Robert's life I never knew about? How was that possible? We'd been together since I was 22 years old. There wasn't a corner of his soul I hadn't believed I'd touched, or so I thought. "Michael," I whispered, my voice brittle. "What are you talking about? Don't stand there and speak in riddles. If you've got something to say, then say it." He sighed heavily, running a hand down his face, his shoulders slumping with the weight of what he carried. "Maggie, I loved Robert like a brother. You know that. I never wanted to be the one to tell you this, especially not today. But he's gone now, and the secret he kept, it wasn't fair to leave it buried with him." My chest ached. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, my hands gripping each other so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Then out with it," I said. "Don't drag this out any longer." Michael sat across from me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the rug between us. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost as though he feared the walls might repeat his words. "Robert had another life, Maggie. For years. And I don't mean an affair, though that would almost be easier to explain. He had responsibilities, people depending on him that he never told you about. And I was the one helping him keep it hidden." I blinked, my mind spinning. My first thought was of betrayal, that dreaded suspicion of another woman lurking somewhere out there. But Michael's tone was different, his words careful. Responsibilities. People. It didn't sound like romance, it sounded heavier, darker. "What people?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "Michael, look at me. What kind of life are you talking about?" Finally, he raised his eyes to mine, and for the first time, I saw something in him that frightened me, guilt. He had a son, Maggie. A son you never knew about. The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, shaking my head slowly, convinced I'd misheard. What are you saying? Robert and I had 2 children, Caroline and David. That was it. That was our family. Michael leaned back, his eyes heavy with sorrow. Before you and Robert were married, before you even met him, he was with someone else. Her name was Linda. They were young, it wasn't serious. Or at least that's what Robert said. But when Linda got pregnant, she decided to keep the baby. Robert wanted to do the right thing, but he was only 19 and he wasn't ready. So they made an arrangement. He would provide support quietly, and Linda would raise the boy without disrupting Robert's life. I felt the room tilt around me. My breath came in shallow gasps, the edges of my vision swimming. Un son? My husband had a son I never knew about? For 50 years we shared a home, a bed, a family, and he kept this locked away? No, I whispered, shaking my head. You're lying. You must be mistaken. I wish I were, Michael said softly. But I was there. I knew Linda. I met the boy. His name is Daniel. He's grown now, nearly 50 himself. Robert kept up with him through me, through letters, through money he sent quietly. He didn't abandon him, but he also didn't bring him into your world. He thought it would ruin everything. I sat in silence, my hands trembling. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, its sound suddenly louder than it had ever been before. I wanted to scream. I wanted to curse Robert's name, to rip apart every photograph that hung on my walls. But all I could do was sit there, frozen, as the weight of the revelation pressed down on me. Finally I found my voice. Why are you telling me this now, Michael? Why not years ago? Why not when I could have asked Robert myself? Because it wasn't my secret to tell, he said, his voice steady but filled with regret. I begged him to tell you. I told him more than once that you deserved to know. But he was terrified. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of shattering the life you two had built. And after a while, I stopped pushing. I thought maybe it was for the best. But today, standing in that church watching you say goodbye to him, I couldn't let you live the rest of your life in ignorance. You needed to know the truth, even if it breaks your heart. The tears I'd held back during the funeral now streamed freely down my face. My husband, the man I trusted more than anyone in this world, had carried on a secret life right under my nose. And Michael, his so-called best friend, had been complicit in it all. Does Caroline know? Does David? I asked. Michael shook his head. No, only you. Robert wanted it that way. I stood, pacing the living room like a trapped animal. My feet pressed into the carpet, back and forth, my hands running through my hair. 100 memories flooded my mind. Nights Robert came home late. Weekends he said he was working on the house but was gone for hours. The trips he took alone. I had chalked it all up to normal life, the ebb and flow of marriage. But now, every unexplained moment felt like a piece of evidence stacked against him. I turned sharply back to Michael. Where is he? This son of his. Where is Daniel? Michael hesitated. He's here, Maggie. In town. He came to the funeral today. You just didn't realize it. My breath caught again. He was there? In the church. Michael nodded slowly. He sat in the back. He didn't come forward, didn't want to cause a scene. But he wanted to say goodbye to his father. A strange mix of emotions churned inside me. Rage, betrayal, curiosity, sorrow. Part of me wanted to march out and find this Daniel, to demand answers, to see the face of the man who was my husband's secret for all these years. Another part of me wanted to shut the door, pour myself a stiff drink, and pretend I'd never heard Michael's words. I pressed my hands to my face, letting out a long, shaky breath. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can handle this. Michael stood, his expression solemn. Take your time, Maggie. You don't have to decide anything tonight. But know this, Daniel is out there. And whether you choose to meet him or not, the truth is part of your life now. You can't unknow it. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I sank back onto the sofa, unable to keep standing. Michael lingered a moment longer, then quietly let himself out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For a long time I sat there in silence. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the world damp and gray. I could hear the faint sound of Caroline in the kitchen, rinsing dishes from the funeral reception, her voice murmuring softly to David. They had no idea the storm that had just been unleashed in my heart. And as I sat there, staring at the framed photographs of Robert on the mantel, smiling that familiar smile I had loved for so long, a single thought kept circling in my mind, relentless and unforgiving. Who was Robert, really? And had I ever truly known the man I married? Sleep never came easy that night. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around my legs, the weight of Michael's revelation pressing harder against me with every passing hour. At one point I found myself staring at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the plaster just to keep my mind from spinning out of control. But it was no use. Every number turned into a question, and every question circled back to the same haunting truth. Robert had lived a life I didn't know. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the curtains, my body felt heavy with exhaustion, but my mind remained restless. I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Caroline, who had insisted on staying the night to keep me company. She was curled up in the guest room down the hall, her steady breathing a reminder that, at least for her, the world hadn't been shattered the way mine had. I slipped into my robe and padded into the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of coffee and flowers, a mix left over from the endless stream of visitors who had filled the place the day before. On the counter sat a bouquet of lilies, their petals beginning to wilt, their sweet fragrance almost suffocating now. I busied myself with the coffee maker, anything to keep my hands from shaking. When the coffee was ready, I poured a cup and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the street was quiet, damp from the night's rain, the world slowly waking up. I sipped the bitter liquid, hoping it would steady me. It didn't. My thoughts went straight to Daniel, the son I never knew existed. The son who had sat in the back of the church while I stood at the front, weeping over Robert's coffin. What had he thought as he watched me, the wife who had been kept in the dark? Did he resent me for being the one Robert had chosen to build a family with? Or had he felt pity, knowing I was oblivious to the truth? The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. Caroline entered the kitchen, her hair messy from sleep, her eyes puffy. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. She poured herself some coffee and sat across from me. For a while we just sat in silence, sipping, letting the morning settle around us. Finally she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Yesterday was hard, but we got through it together." Her words nearly broke me. She didn't know the half of it. And part of me wanted to blurt it all out, to share the burden of what Michael had told me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I made sense of it myself. So I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes, we did." Caroline studied me for a moment, then let it go. She started talking about David, about how he'd promised to come by later to help with some of the arrangements. Her voice was steady, her words ordinary, and for a brief moment, I envied her ignorance. When she left the table to make a phone call, I pulled my robe tighter around me and stared at the steam rising from my coffee. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself forever. The truth was too big, too heavy. But who would I even tell first? Caroline? David? Or Daniel himself? The thought of meeting Daniel terrified me, but it also pulled at something deep inside. If he was Robert's son, that made him part of me too, whether I liked it or not. He carried half of Robert's blood, half of the man I had loved for over 4 decades. How could I pretend he didn't exist now that I knew? I decided then that I needed answers, not from Michael, not from speculation, but from Daniel himself. If I was going to live with this truth, I needed to look it in the eye. Later in the morning, after Caroline left to run errands, I found myself standing by the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Michael's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice tired but steady. "Maggie." "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "I need to see him." "Daniel, can you arrange that?" There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "No," I admitted, my throat tight. "But I have to do it anyway." Michael exhaled slowly. "All right. I'll call him. But Maggie, be gentle. He didn't ask for any of this. I know, I whispered. The rest of the morning crawled by, every tick of the clock dragging my nerves thinner. When Michael finally called back, he told me Daniel was willing to meet. He'd come by the house that afternoon. I spent the hours leading up to it pacing the living room, straightening and restraightening the cushions, dusting the same shelves over and over again. My stomach twisted in knots, my heart beating faster every time I thought of the moment the doorbell would ring. When it finally did, I froze. My hand hovered over the doorknob for what felt like forever. Then with a deep breath I opened the door. There he stood. Daniel. He was tall with broad shoulders, his hair graying at the temples, his eyes a piercing shade of blue that instantly reminded me of Robert. My breath caught in my throat. It was like seeing a ghost, familiar yet strange all at once. Mrs. Thompson? He said softly, his voice deep, measured. Yes, I managed. You must be Daniel. He nodded, his expression uncertain, as though he too was grappling with the weight of this moment. I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. He hesitated for just a second before crossing the threshold, his presence filling the room. We stood there awkwardly at first, the silence thick, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I gestured toward the sofa. Please sit. He did, perching on the edge, his hands clasped tightly together. I sat across from him, my eyes fixed on his face, searching for traces of Robert. And they were there, subtle but undeniable. The curve of his jaw, the shape of his smile when it flickered faintly, the way he held himself. I suppose I should start by saying I'm sorry, Daniel said, his voice low. I didn't mean to intrude at the funeral. Yesterday wasn't about me. It was about him and about you. His words stung not because they were cruel but because they rang true. For all those years he had been a shadow in Robert's life. A secret carried quietly, never fully acknowledged. Daniel, I said softly, I didn't know. I had no idea. He never told me. I figured, he said, offering a small sad smile. If you had, you would have reached out sooner. But that wasn't Robert. He thought he was protecting you. I swallowed hard. Protecting me? Or protecting himself? Daniel's eyes met mine, and for a long moment we just sat there, the silence speaking louder than words ever could. Finally he said, maybe both. I leaned back, my hands trembling in my lap. I don't know how to process this. Part of me wants to scream at him, to tear apart every memory we had. And another part of me can't stop seeing him in you. Daniel's gaze softened. I don't expect anything from you, Mrs. Thompson. I don't expect forgiveness for him or acceptance for me. I wanted to meet you. To know the woman he loved enough to keep me a secret from. He used to talk about you, you know. Not directly, not in detail. But in the way he spoke, in the way he carried himself when he mentioned his family. I knew you were everything to him. The words cut deep. Not with malice but with truth. Robert had loved me, of that I had no doubt. But he had also lied. And the two truths tangled together in a knot I wasn't sure could ever be untied. We sat there for what felt like hours, talking in fragments, circling around the truth without fully touching it. He told me about his life, his work, his children, his quiet existence in another town not far from here. I listened, torn between fascination and heartbreak. And as the afternoon light shifted through the curtains, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. Because in his eyes, in his voice, in his presence, I saw Robert. And though that hurt in ways I couldn't fully put into words, it also reminded me of the man I had loved, flaws and all. The sunlight had shifted into a warmer hue, casting golden streaks across the living room as Daniel and I sat facing one another. Time had slipped through my fingers without me noticing. Hours felt like minutes, and yet every moment carried the weight of years I could never reclaim. He leaned back against the sofa finally, his shoulders relaxing just a little. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, he admitted, his voice steady but quiet. I wasn't sure either, I said honestly. But I couldn't stop thinking about you after Michael told me. I had to look you in the eye, to understand what Robert hid from me all this time. Daniel nodded, his gaze steady. I get it. He wasn't an easy man to understand. He lived by his own rules for better or worse. The way he said it, calm, almost forgiving, made my chest tighten. For me, Robert's secrecy felt like a betrayal. But for Daniel, it was just part of the man he had known all along. The clock in the hallway chimed softly, startling me. It reminded me that life was still moving, the world outside still ticking along while I was caught in the storm of revelations. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, needing a moment to collect myself. He smiled faintly. "Sure." I rose and went into the kitchen, filling the kettle with water. My hand shook slightly as I set it on the stove. I stared at the flame flickering beneath the kettle, thinking of all the nights I had done this exact thing for Robert. How many times had I poured him a cup, sitting at this very table, never knowing that another child, another life existed somewhere else. Daniel joined me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. His presence filled the room in a way that was both familiar and foreign. "This house," he said, glancing around. "It feels like him." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yes, well, every corner has his mark. I suppose that's why yesterday felt unbearable, saying goodbye here, in the spaces that carry him." The kettle whistled, and I busied myself with the cups. I handed one to him, our fingers brushing lightly as I did. The contact jolted me, a reminder that he wasn't just a figment of Robert's past. He was flesh and blood, alive and standing in my kitchen. We sat at the table, sipping in silence for a while. Finally I asked, Did Robert ever tell you about me? About us?" Daniel hesitated, swirling his tea slowly. "Bits and pieces. I knew he was married, of course. Knew he had a son and daughter. But he never went into detail. I think he didn't want to blur the lines any more than they already were." "Blur the lines," I repeated softly, the phrase lingering in my mind. That was exactly what Robert had done. Lived with blurred lines, straddling two worlds, and somehow convincing us all it was normal. Daniel looked up at me then, his expression somber. "I don't want to cause you more pain, Mrs. Thompson. That's the last thing I want. But I also don't want to vanish again. Not after finally meeting you." His words cut straight through me. I set my cup down carefully, my hand trembling. "Please call me Margaret. Or Maggie. That's who I am. Not just Robert's widow." His eyes softened. "Maggie." The sound of my name on his lips startled me, but in a strange way it also grounded me. He wasn't trying to replace Robert, nor was he trying to force himself into my life. He was simply asking to exist in it honestly this time. The hours stretched, and slowly, the heaviness of our conversation gave way to something gentler. He told me about his job, how he had spent most of his life working with his hands, carpentry and small renovations. He described his grown children, a son who lived in Texas and a daughter who taught high school English. I listened, realizing with each word that Robert had missed all of this. Every graduation, every milestone, every story. "Do you resent him?" I asked suddenly. Daniel leaned back, exhaling. "I used to. As a boy, I hated the secrecy, the excuses, the short visits where he'd show up and then disappear. But as I got older, I realized anger would only eat me alive. So I tried to accept what little I had. A handful of moments, a father who existed in shadows. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I felt tears prick my eyes. "I don't know if I can be that forgiving." "You don't have to be," he said gently. "Your pain is different. He promised you a life built on honesty. And he didn't keep that promise." The words cracked something open in me. I pressed my fingers to my lips, fighting the sob that rose in my throat. Daniel sat quietly, giving me space, not trying to fix it, not rushing me, just letting me feel. When I finally looked up, his eyes were steady on mine. "You loved him," he said simply. "I did," I whispered. "With everything I had." "And despite it all," Daniel said, "I think he loved you too. Maybe more than anyone." The statement caught me off guard. "How can you say that? He betrayed me." "Because," Daniel said, "if he didn't, he would have told you. He would have tried to merge his worlds instead of keeping me in the shadows. He thought he was protecting you because he loved you, misguided as it was." The idea twisted painfully in my chest. Could love and betrayal exist side by side like that? Could Robert have truly loved me while keeping such a monumental secret? We lingered at the table until the light outside dimmed. When Daniel finally stood to leave, I felt a strange ache at the thought of him walking out the door. I'm not sure what happens now, I admitted. Neither am I, he said, pausing at the doorway. But I'd like to see you again. If that's all right. I swallowed, my heart heavy but strangely lighter than it had been that morning. Yes, I think I'd like that too. He gave me a small smile, and for the first time that day it wasn't weighed down by sorrow. Thank you, Maggie. As the door closed behind him, the house fell quiet again. But it wasn't the suffocating silence of grief I'd felt before. It was different, unsettling, yes, but filled with possibility. I walked back into the living room and sank onto the sofa, staring at the space Daniel had just occupied. My heart ached for Robert, for the life we'd shared and the trust that had been broken. But alongside that ache, something new was stirring. An unexpected connection, a thread to a truth I could no longer deny. When Caroline returned later, I didn't tell her about Daniel. Not yet. I wasn't ready to share this fragile new piece of my life. Instead, I listened as she recounted her day, her voice filling the room with normalcy. But even as I nodded and smiled, my thoughts drifted back to Daniel, to his eyes so much like Robert's, to the way he had looked at me, not with resentment but with quiet respect. As I finally lay down in bed that night, exhaustion pulling at my bones, I realized something that chilled and comforted me all at once. My story with Robert hadn't ended at the funeral. It was still unfolding, just in a way I never could have imagined. Morning light seeped gently through the curtains, the pale glow spreading across my bedroom walls. I woke earlier than usual, my mind restless, replaying every word Daniel had said the previous evening. Sleep had been shallow, a thin veil over the storm of thoughts swirling inside me. I sat up slowly, my body heavy with age and grief, but also with something else I couldn't quite name. My heart felt unsettled, tugged in two directions, toward the past I thought I knew, and toward this unexpected present that was reshaping itself around me. In the kitchen, I brewed a pot of coffee, the familiar scent filling the house. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and sat at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Robert had sat there countless mornings, his newspaper folded neatly, his eyes barely looking up as I spoke about my plans for the day. I used to think his silence was simply his way. Now I wondered if his mind had been elsewhere, perhaps drifting to Daniel or to the family I never knew. The sharp ring of the doorbell startled me. I set my mug down and rose, smoothing my robe as I went to the door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, his expression tentative. "Good morning," he said softly, as if unsure of his welcome. I blinked at him in surprise. "Daniel, I wasn't expecting you." "I know. I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I just couldn't stay away. Yesterday felt too important to leave hanging." I hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in." He entered quietly, carrying a small brown paper bag. "I brought some muffins from the bakery down the street. Figured we could share." The gesture caught me off guard, simple and kind. I led him to the kitchen, where the coffee still sat steaming. "Well, I already made coffee. Seems we were thinking along the same lines." He smiled faintly, setting the bag on the table. We settled across from one another, the muffins between us, steam curling up from our cups. For a while, neither of us spoke. It was a silence that didn't feel forced, just heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, I asked, "Why now, Daniel? Why tell me at the funeral after all these years?" He sighed, his eyes lowering to his coffee. "Because I couldn't stand by anymore, watching you bury him without knowing. It felt wrong to let you grieve a version of him that wasn't the full truth. You deserved honesty, even if it came late." His words struck me deeply. I thought of Robert's coffin, the flowers piled high, the whispered condolences. All of it wrapped in layers of secrecy. "It still hurts," I admitted, knowing he chose silence over trust. "I know," Daniel said quietly, "and I can't change that. But maybe I can give you pieces he never did. Pieces of him you didn't get to see." I studied him, the lines etched into his face, the resemblance to Robert in the slope of his nose and the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. "You look like him," I said without meaning to. Daniel chuckled softly. "So I've been told. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see him staring back at me. Other times I see just myself. It's complicated." I understood more than I wanted to admit. Loving Robert had always been complicated. We broke muffins in silence, the crumbs scattering on the table. As I ate, Daniel began to share small stories, memories from his childhood. He told me about fishing trips where Robert would appear suddenly, taking him out on the lake for a few hours before vanishing again. About the time Robert taught him to ride a bike, steadying the seat with a firm hand before letting go. Each story was a dagger and a bomb all at once. I imagined Robert laughing with Daniel, guiding him, showing pride. These were moments I never knew existed, moments stolen from me, and given to someone else. And yet, hearing them now made Robert feel alive again, more real than the silent man who sat across from me every morning. At one point Daniel leaned back, his voice quieter. "I used to wait by the window when I was little, hoping his car would pull up. Some days it did. Most days it didn't. My mother used to tell me not to hope too much, that he had another family who needed him. But I hoped anyway." My chest ached. I could picture a young boy, eyes wide with longing, watching for headlights that never came. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. It wasn't your fault. None of this was." The weight of his words settled heavily between us. None of it was my fault, yet all of it had shaped my life in ways I was only now beginning to understand. Caroline arrived mid-morning, her cheerful voice echoing through the hallway. "Mom? I brought those magazines you like." She walked into the kitchen and froze when she saw Daniel. Her eyes flicked from him to me, suspicion etched across her face. "What's going on here?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Caroline, this is Daniel. He was a friend of your father's." Daniel stood, offering his hand politely. "It's nice to meet you, Caroline." She didn't take it right away, her eyes narrowing. "A friend? I don't remember seeing you around." "There's a lot you don't know," I said quickly, my voice firmer than I intended. Caroline looked between us, sensing the tension. "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" I excused myself, following her into the living room. She crossed her arms, her expression sharp. "Who is he really? And don't tell me he's just some friend. I can see it in your face. There's more to this." I hesitated, torn between shielding her and speaking the truth. But the truth had already begun to unravel, and there was no point in weaving it back together with lies. "He's Robert's son," I said finally. The words hung heavy in the air. Caroline's jaw dropped. "What? That's not possible. Dad never." "He did," I interrupted softly. "And Daniel told me yesterday at the funeral." Her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. All these years. He had another child." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes. And I had no idea." Caroline sank into a chair, her face pale. "I can't believe this. How could he keep something like that from us? From you?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But I'm trying to make sense of it." Daniel stepped quietly into the room then, his posture careful. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I just wanted to know the truth of who my father was, and to let you know who I am." Caroline looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and curiosity. "So you're my half-brother?" He nodded gently. "Yes." Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then Caroline stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. "I need air. I can't process this right now." She hurried out, the door closing sharply behind her. I sank into the sofa, pressing a hand to my forehead. "This is too much," I murmured. Daniel sat across from me, his voice calm. "She'll need time. Just like you did." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. I don't know how to tell my son, or anyone else. It feels like the foundation of my life has cracked, and I don't know what will hold. Daniel leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "Maybe it doesn't have to hold. Maybe it's about building something new. Something honest, even if it's messy." His words lingered, both frightening and comforting. Honest. Messy. That was what this day had become, and perhaps what it would continue to be. As the hours passed, Daniel didn't press for more. He simply stayed, helping me water the plants, listening as I rambled about mundane things like recipes and neighborhood gossip. It was as if we were both trying to weave some normalcy into a day that had unraveled. By late afternoon, the weight of Caroline's reaction still lingered. I stood by the window watching the sun dip lower, my reflection staring back at me. My face looked tired, older than I remembered. But there was something new there too, a flicker of resilience, of possibility. Behind me, Daniel spoke softly. "Thank you for letting me in today, Maggie. I know it wasn't easy." I turned to face him. "Thank you for coming back. Even if it turned my world upside down." He smiled faintly. Sometimes the world has to turn upside down for us to see what was hidden underneath. I didn't answer, but his words stayed with me as he left for the second time in as many days. The house was unusually still that evening, the silence pressing in on me like a heavy blanket. After Daniel left, I tried to busy myself with little tasks. Folding laundry, washing dishes, tidying the living room. But no matter how much I moved, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Caroline's shocked face, Daniel's quiet steadiness, Robert's hidden choices. All of it churned together inside me. I finally sank onto the couch, staring at the framed photographs lining the mantel. Robert's smile looked back at me in each picture, polished and practiced. Wedding anniversaries, Christmas mornings, summer picnics. All captured in still images that suddenly felt incomplete. I wondered how many of those smiles had been genuine, and how many had been carefully constructed to keep the truth buried. The phone rang sharply, breaking my thoughts. I answered quickly, half hoping it might be Caroline. "Mom." Her voice came through, tight and unsettled. "Caroline." I breathed, relief flooding me. "I was worried you wouldn't call." "I just needed space," she said. "I drove around for a while. Stopped by the park. I'm still in shock. But I couldn't just leave things like that." "Thank you for calling," I said softly. "I know this is a lot to take in. It feels like our whole life was a lie," she admitted. Dad was supposed to be steady, dependable. And now I'm wondering who he really was. I swallowed hard. I'm wondering the same thing. But I don't want us to lose ourselves in his secrets. We still have each other. There was silence on the other end before she finally said, "Maybe we should talk. In person. Tonight." "Yes," I agreed immediately. "Come over. Please." When she arrived, her eyes were red, her face drawn. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that clung, almost desperate. We sat down together at the kitchen table, the muffins Daniel had brought still on a plate between us. Caroline picked at one absent-mindedly. "I keep thinking about when I was little. Dad used to miss my school plays sometimes or my games. He'd always have some excuse, work, meetings, whatever. I believed him. But now I'm wondering if he was with Daniel instead." Her words cut into me. "I thought the same thing earlier," I admitted. "All those quiet mornings, all those late nights. I thought they were just part of who he was. But maybe they were part of who he was with someone else." She let out a shaky laugh. "It makes me angry. But at the same time, I feel sorry for Daniel. He grew up without Dad being there all the time. At least we had him, even if it wasn't the full truth." Her compassion surprised me, and I reached across the table, taking her hand. "You're stronger than I am right now." "I'm still caught between anger and sadness." "We don't have to pick one," she said gently. "We can feel all of it." I smiled faintly, tears welling. "You sound wiser than me tonight." She squeezed my hand. "Maybe it's just survival. I don't want this secret to destroy us." We sat together for a while, sipping coffee, letting the silence be less heavy than before. The clock ticked softly, marking time in a house that suddenly felt different, as if it was holding its breath with us. Later, Caroline leaned back, her voice hesitant. "Do you think you'll see him again? Daniel?" The question startled me. "I don't know. Today when he came back, it didn't feel wrong. It felt necessary. Like there were things I needed to hear from him, even if they hurt." She nodded slowly. "I don't hate him. I just don't know what to do with him yet." He feels like a stranger who's also family. That's exactly how I feel, I admitted. Strange and familiar all at once. The doorbell rang suddenly, making us both jump. Caroline frowned. Who could that be at this hour? I went to the door and there he was again, Daniel. His posture was apologetic, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. I'm sorry to come back so late, he said quickly. But I realized I left something important unsaid. I hesitated, then opened the door wider. Come in. When Caroline saw him, her body tensed, but she stayed seated, her arms folded. Daniel gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before turning to me. I wanted to tell you something, he said. Something I didn't mention earlier because I was afraid it would be too much. But maybe it's worse to keep holding it in. My heart quickened. What is it? He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. My mother passed away a few years ago. Before she died, she told me that Robert always wanted to tell you the truth. He even wrote letters to you, but he never sent them. She gave them to me. I froze. Letters? Yes, he said quietly. I have them. I didn't bring them today because I wasn't sure if you'd want them. But I think you deserve to read them. They're his words. Not mine, not hers. His. Caroline inhaled sharply. Oh my God. My chest tightened, tears stinging my eyes. The thought of Robert's handwriting, his voice captured on paper, hidden from me all these years, it was overwhelming. Can you bring them? I whispered. Daniel nodded. Tomorrow. If you want me to. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. Yes. Bring them. He looked relieved. Okay. I will. Caroline stood then, her voice steady but firm. If those letters exist, then we need to see them. Both of us. I want to know what kind of man my father really was. Daniel nodded again, his expression solemn. You'll know. I promise. The weight of his words settled into the room, filling the silence with something that wasn't just grief anymore. It was anticipation, fragile and frightening. After Daniel left, Caroline and I sat together again, our hands clasped across the table. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The idea of those letters hung between us, shimmering like a bridge across a chasm we didn't yet know how to cross. Finally, Caroline whispered, Do you think he loved us, Mom? Or do you think we were just his cover? The question pierced me, sharp and painful. I thought of Robert's quiet presence, his steady hand on mine at family gatherings, the way he tucked a blanket around me on cold nights. I think he loved us, I said slowly. But I think he also loved parts of himself he couldn't share with us. Maybe that's what these letters will show. She nodded, though her eyes were clouded. I just don't want to hate him. Neither do I said softly. That night, after Caroline went home, I sat alone in the living room with the lights dimmed. I tried to imagine what those letters might say. Would they be apologies? Explanations? Would they make me angrier? Or would they bring peace? I didn't know. I looked around the house, the familiar furniture, the photographs, the life Robert and I had built together. And I realized that tomorrow, with a few envelopes and a handful of words, that life might change again. I whispered into the stillness, as if Robert could hear me. You should have told me. The silence gave no answer, only the ticking of the clock, each second carrying me closer to truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Morning light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, the kind that usually brought comfort. But that day it carried weight. I woke early, unable to rest, my mind fixed on the promise of Robert's letters. The house felt charged like the air before a storm. I moved through the room slowly, touching the familiar things. A framed quilt square, Robert's favorite chair, the chipped mug he always used for coffee. They all seemed to hum with the possibility of what I was about to learn. I made a pot of coffee, my hands trembling as I measured the grounds. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The drip of the pot, the creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the kitchen clock. I sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from my cup, my thoughts circling endlessly. Would his letters explain everything? Or would they only deepen the ache in my heart? The doorbell rang mid-morning, startling me so much I nearly dropped my cup. I hurried to the door, my breath caught in my throat. Daniel stood there, holding a small wooden box. His expression was solemn but gentle. "Good morning," he said softly.
"Come in," he whispered, stepping aside.
Caroline arrived minutes later, her hair pulled back, her face pale but resolute. She glanced at the box Daniel had placed on the table. "Are those?" "Yes," he answered, resting his hand on the lid. "There are 5 letters. Each one sealed in an envelope dated. The first is from the year you were born, Caroline." Her eyes widened, flicking to me. "All this time," Daniel nodded. "He wrote them but never sent them. My mother kept them safe. When she passed, she gave them to me." My hands trembled as I reached for the lid. For a moment I hesitated, afraid of what was inside. Then I lifted it slowly. The box creaked and there they were. 5 envelopes, yellowed slightly with age, Robert's handwriting unmistakable on each one. My throat tightened at the sight of his familiar script. Caroline reached forward, picking up the first envelope. She ran her thumb over her father's handwriting. "Should we read them together?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Together." We opened the first letter, dated June 1975. The summer Caroline was born. I unfolded the paper carefully, the ink slightly faded. Robert's words spilled out, raw and aching. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "By the time you read this, our daughter will already be in your arms. She is beautiful just like you. But I must confess something that weighs heavy on my heart. I have another child, a boy. His name is Daniel. He is only a few months old. His mother is not my wife, but she is someone I once loved deeply. I never stopped. I cannot tell you this now because I fear it would break us apart. But I want you to know that my love for you is real, even if my heart has been divided." I pressed the paper to my chest, tears streaming freely. Caroline stared at me, her own tears spilling. "He wanted to tell you even then." The second letter, from 1985, carried a different tone. "Margaret, today Daniel turned 10. I saw him from a distance playing baseball. He looks so much like me it hurts. I wanted to run to him to hold him but I couldn't. Instead I sat in the car, my chest aching with pride and regret. Please forgive me for the lies I tell, the absences you endure. I tell myself I do it to protect you, but perhaps I do it to protect myself." Caroline let out a shaky breath. "So all those times he wasn't at work. He was with him." "Yes," I whispered. "But he hated the lies. You can hear it." The third letter, written in 1995, was shorter. "My dearest, Daniel is growing into a fine young man. He deserves so much more than the shadows I give him. I fear one day you will discover my secret and hate me forever. If that day comes, know this. Every choice I made was because I couldn't bear to lose you. You are the anchor of my life. You and Caroline are my heart. Daniel is the part of me I never had the courage to share." By then, the room was filled with quiet sobs, mine, Caroline's, even Daniel's. He wiped his eyes quickly, his shoulders tense. The fourth letter, from 2005, struck deepest. "Margaret, I am tired. The years have worn on me, and the lies have grown heavy. I have thought often of telling you the truth, but each time I look at you I lose my courage. I see the trust in your eyes, the love. How could I shatter that? I am a coward, Margaret. A coward who loves 2 families and feels he deserves neither." I clutched Caroline's hand tightly. "He should have told us," I whispered. She nodded, tears streaming. "But he was scared." Finally, we opened the 5th letter, dated just 2 years ago. "My beloved Margaret, if you are reading this, then the truth has come to light. I am sorry for the years of deception, the half-life I lived. I loved you truly with every fiber of my being. But I also loved Daniel, though in secret. If you can, please forgive me. Not for me but for him. He deserves your kindness, your acceptance. He is as much a part of me as Caroline is. I pray that one day, the 2 of them might meet not as strangers but as family." By the time I finished reading, the paper was wet with tears. I couldn't speak. The room felt heavy, yet something inside me had shifted. Caroline's voice broke the silence. "He wanted us to know each other. He wanted us to be family." She turned to Daniel, her expression raw but open. "I don't know how to do this, but I don't hate you. Not anymore." Daniel's eyes glistened. I never wanted to take anything from you. I just wanted to know where I came from. Now, I think I know. I reached for both their hands, one on each side of me. My voice shook, but it was steady enough. We can't change what Robert did, but we can choose what we do now. And I don't want to let his secrets ruin us. I want to try to build something new together. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not complete, not perfect, but a start. We sat there, the three of us, holding hands across the table. The letters spread out before us like bridges over a broken past. The pain was still there, yes. But so was something else. The faint, flickering light of forgiveness. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the windows, I whispered to myself, though maybe it was to Robert too. The truth did change everything. But maybe, it doesn't have to destroy everything. And in that quiet, fragile moment I believed it.